This is the 415ers podcast brought to you by the Odyssey Sports Podcast Network with 95.7 The Game, coming at you twice a week here in the off season. That's Marc Grandi. I'm Evan Giddings. Listen to us on the Odyssey app. Please download, rate, and subscribe. All right, well, let's get to the last part of this, Marc, which is, of course, the quarterbacks and how they performed throughout the second week of OTAs. It was interesting to see that Sam Darnold was getting first-team reps, and it just feels almost natural the way we've kind of heard folks talk about both Darnold as well as the 49ers. Trey Lance had first crack at first-team reps last week in the first week of OTAs. Sam Darnold appears to be getting the majority of those in week 2, although Trey Lance is still throwing to Ayuk. He's still throwing to first-team guys. But I don't know. From everything that I read, from what I've heard, and from the few videos that we've had a chance to see, Marc, kind of seems like a net neutral at this point between the two guys. Like, even if Trey Lance and he's kind of tighten up those mechanics and the spiral looks good, it's difficult for me to discern any one way whether Lance or Darnold has a leg up. And so the first place my mind went to is like, where does the tie go? But I'll throw it to you and what you kind of took away from this week from the quarterbacks.
Yeah, I kind of had a similar takeaway. Just hearing what he said about all three guys, you can kind of feel the hierarchy, you know? And it's Brock Purdy, clear number one, and then we'll figure out the rest. That's kind of what I got as well. I couldn't really make a ton between Sam Darnold and Trey Lance. I mean, what he said about Sam Darnold was, quote, he's come in, he's been about the work, he's been through a lot in his career. I think everybody that knows football or watches football can see the skill set that Sam has. And then he goes on to talk about how we can, help him with our system and our offense, yada, 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 whatever. And then for Trey Lance, he says Trey did everything he possibly could last offseason to get healthy. And I don't think people realize how difficult that was for him, all the while trying to go out every single day and prove that you can be the guy to lead the team. It's not easy, all of that. So he's talking about how they've both been through a lot, how they're both fighting, and how they can hopefully get some stability in their careers. And a lot of it isn't really even talking about their abilities as football players. And I think that's what stands out about me, or for me, about Trey Lance. That's what stands out to me. So many of the San Francisco 49ers comments about Trey Lance tend to be not about his ability on the field. You know what I'm saying? They tend to be about his mindset and how he's fighting through challenges and how he has handled everything with dignity and grace. And those are all fantastic things. But so much of what his coaches and people within the 49ers organization are saying are, this guy's really great. We love him. He is the best. But they just won't come out and say, man, he can really sling the football around. Man, he's a great quarterback. I don't know. I'm probably reading into it a bit too much, but it just seems like that's how this team is tackling the question of Trey Lance right now in the public's eye. They're not wrong. I mean, he is. We've talked about it a lot. He is a fantastic person, and he handles everything the right way. But these comments as well kind of struck me in that way that, they're just not really talking about his on-the-field ability.
Yeah, and we're talking about quarterbacks coach Brian Griese and his comments about Sam Darnold, as well as, of course, Trey Lance. I would also say that it does make it difficult, I'm sure, for a lot of people to look at, even if it's a practice line and you're playing 11 on 11 and there's not a lot of contact. But, when you see Trey Lance and the reports from journalists about a 6 for 12 or, slightly above a 50% completion percentage, in his first week in some instances, it does make it difficult, I think, to kind of look past that for a lot of people, and maybe even within the 49ers as well, just because that's kind of been the MO for him his first and even second season last year. Was he wasn't the greatest practice player, and then, of course, we haven't seen him be able to put together a large portion of games on the field. So which way do you fall? It's kind of just dependent on your bias. I hear you about Griese's comments, and the other theme that I got from listening to what everyone has talked about is just, they're focusing on him just being back, like just, focusing on kind of everything he's had to overcome to this point and not necessarily where he could be going, not necessarily what he has improved on outside of what the public has seen, which is his work with Jeff Christensen and Patrick Mahomes and the mechanics. All of that, I feel like, has been for public consumption, and that's been reiterated by the coaching staff, but there hasn't been anything new. And I think that's what you're talking about, is there hasn't been anything that's been sort of an update along Trey Lance's progression towards hopeful quarterback, maybe of the future, maybe with a different team, maybe as a backup, maybe the second guy. Like we still don't know, and it seems like they don't know exactly what they want to do with him yet. And I just question if that's going to change. And if not, how does that look? Or does he pretty much just get put on the back burner and you're praying that Brock Purdy can be ready for week 1? I don't know.
Yeah, and look, I get it. You're right. I mean, what do they have to go off of to talk about his abilities as a quarterback? I mean, the general conclusion that I've come to, Evan, if they do not give Trey Lance a chance this season, then they're telling you they've determined that he's not good enough. And they've done that without really seeing much of him in
I don't know if
games.
not good enough is the term, though. Not better than Brock Purdy, I think is the way to look at that.
Well, yeah, that's what I'm saying. Not good enough to be a starting quarterback on this team, which would mean you'd have to be better than Brock Purdy.
Yeah,
And
but
they
I
feel
think that's a pretty high bar at this point. I mean, just based on what he's, and also the 49ers aren't in a position where they can't, like, they can't just wait and see what they have. Like, if he goes in for 4 weeks and loses 3 games but shows promise, that still means they're 1-3 as a Super Bowl contender. Like that, I think that's also where they're looking at this too. Like, this guy, sure, he might be great, and it's not that he can't be better than he is now, but he's not right for us now.
yeah. I mean, you're probably right. That's the conversation and the discussion within the walls in Santa Clara right now. But I think in relation to the conversation about how he's being talked about, where that comes in is what is there to talk about him as a quarterback? Because we just simply don't know whether or not the 49ers internally feel some kind of way about him. And potentially they do feel like they're pretty confident that he's not going to be ever at Brock Purdy's level. Even if they do feel that way, they're of course not going to come out and say something along those lines. But if they don't feel that way and they honestly don't know, then what are they going to say about Trey Lance as a quarterback? So I think that's kind of the nature of these conversations is, well, we just simply don't quite know yet. And that's totally fine given the circumstances of the first 2 years of Trey Lance's career. That is understandable. It should be, and it should feel that way. It's unfortunate for Trey Lance, but it's probably just the nature of the situation.
I'm also hoping that the conversation surrounding Sam Darnold and Griese's comments about his skill set and what he brings is just because they haven't really seen him before in person. And I don't mean that like I'm hoping that Sam Darnold is not a good quarterback, because if the 49ers need him, I hope he does perform. I want them to succeed. But I'm also hoping that the lack of those comments concerning Trey Lance is because they already know what the skill set is. And maybe you could say it's concerning that he hasn't made a tangible leap immediately, that they're like, oh my God, this guy's blown us out of the water and he's throwing frozen ropes left and right. Uh, but so that's another part of it too, where I'm just kind of thinking, okay, well, maybe they're talking about Darnold this way because he's just the new kid on the block.
Yeah, no, I mean it's kind of like the new toy, right? And you're kind of just trying to figure out what you have in him. And again, I think we do have to take all of these comments with a grain of salt. I mean, Brian Griese is a television guy in his past before taking this job a year ago now. He knows how this all works. He's not just going to go out there and say something spicy to the media for the hell of it. These are all measured and thought out responses. I mean, this is a gigantic organization and franchise and one of the more historic ones in the league. It's not like they're sending their guys out to talk to the media in front of all these microphones and cameras without having somewhat of a plan attached. So these are all well thought out responses by the 49ers, regardless of who you're talking to. So they're not going to trash anyone. They're not going to overpromise on someone that they feel questionable about. They're not going to do any of those things. So it's just interesting to kind of try to dive through the way in which they're talking about all these guys and see if we can kind of pick through how they actually feel by reading between the lines. In the case of Brian Griese, I think you're right on the Sam Darnold standpoint. And it's just kind of interesting given how much longer Trey Lance has been with the organization, that at this point, the Lance conversation is much more similar to the Purdy conversation, or pardon me, to the Darnold conversation than it is to the Purdy conversation.
Well, we'll continue to read between the lines all summer long because Kyle Shanahan does it with the best. He gives us the tea leaves, and we do with them what we can. And Brian Griese, as a former longtime NFL quarterback, I'm sure has a lot of experience doing the same. So we'll continue to do that throughout this offseason, twice a week here on the 415ers. That is Marc Grandi. I'm Evan Giddings. Please hit the Odyssey app, download, rate, subscribe. We appreciate you tuning in this week. Just a couple of weeks away from mandatory minicamp in which we can see all the big boys. We can see these guys in pads and hopefully get a better idea of what we're looking at come 2023. So stay on the lookout for that. We appreciate you tuning in. Have a good rest of your weekend. We'll talk to you next time.